All right, this is notes 6.1 on chromosomes, okay? Go ahead and write your name here and the period at the top of your notes. And let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so our first point, as we dive into this unit on chromosomes and how DNA is kind of stored and transported in the cell and passed on from generation to generation. One of the most important things that we need to first establish at the beginning is that all cells read the same genome, but they read it differently, okay? Let's go ahead and define some of these terms. So the first term that we need to definitely know is a gene, okay? A gene is a single DNA recipe, okay? It's a single DNA recipe. And that single recipe codes for a protein. Okay, so it's a single DNA recipe that codes for a protein. So genes are found inside of your DNA. They're kind of long strings. So kind of like if you have a book, then the chapters would kind of be the genes. Or if you have a recipe book, each recipe would be a gene, okay? Typically, these genes, usually, I'm gonna abbreviate usually, USU, okay? So usually, these genes are hundreds of bases long, okay? So remember, a base in DNA is kind of like a letter. So in the English alphabet, I have A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on and so forth, and I'd have 26 letters, okay? Or bases, 26 bases. Here in DNA, we've got 4 bases, A, C, T, and G. So if I were to look at a DNA model right here, so here's a DNA model with the double helix shape. The bases are these molecules right here, okay? So maybe we've got a G here, and a G here, and a here, and so on and so forth, okay? So these molecules spell out kind of the instructions for building proteins, and proteins are super important in your cells. And typically, if I have hundreds of these strung together, that is going to make a gene or a recipe for building a protein, okay? Now, just like a recipe is found in a recipe book, genes are found inside of the genome, okay? The genome is just the collection of all the genes in an organism, okay, in each of its cells, okay? So each of the cells inside of an organism has the whole genome, which contains all the genes. So the human genome, guess how many genes the human genome has? About 20,000. So 20,000 genes, and each of those genes codes for different proteins, okay? So every cell in your body has all 20,000 genes, okay? So all 20,000 of those genes are in every single cell, but different cells read the genome differently. So they have the same genome, but they read it differently. It depends on the type of cell, okay? A cell will only transcribe and translate, or another word for that is simply read, okay? Read certain genes. Okay, a cell will only read certain genes. So consider the following genes. Let's look at this. Let's look at this protein right here. Okay, this right here is a rhodopsin protein. Okay, rhodopsin, R-H-O-D-O. Okay, so you'll notice right here this O-P. That kind of makes me think of optical, like an optical illusion or optical glasses. Okay. And the reason it has that in there is because it actually has to do with your vision. So this is kind of a purpley molecule. It actually looks kind of purplish, okay? And this is the protein that allows you to see light. Whoa, okay? Right now, you are watching this video, you're receiving light, and the only reason why you can see that light is because you have this rhodopsin protein inside of your eyes, okay? Now, it contains this little molecule right here in the center that helps it function, and you get that by eating carrots, okay? So that's why carrots are pretty good for your eyes, because they will give you that vitamin that you need for that protein, okay? So the gene that codes for this is found on chromosome 3, and the chromosome is just kind of a bundle of DNA found inside of your cells. So let's consider some different cells and see if they have rhodopsin in them. Now, this is a neuron. It's inside of your brain. So this is the shape of the neuron. And in this picture, you'll see at the top, it has a nucleus right there. And so that contains all the DNA. Now, does this neuron have the gene for rhodopsin? Yes, because every cell has all 20,000 genes that the human body has, okay? So it does have a gene for rhodopsin. Now, it's kind of weird because neurons do not need to see light. And that's why, even though they have the gene, they do not read it. So no, a neuron does not read the gene for rhodopsin. Okay, let's look at this hair cell inside of your ear. So this is a cell inside of your ear. It helps you hear when it vibrates, okay? Does the ear cell have the gene for this protein? Again, yes, it does, because every cell has all genes. Now, does the ear cell need to read rhodopsin? No. Not really, okay? Your ears do not need to see light. So it has the gene, but it doesn't need to read it, okay? This is a cell inside of your eye, okay? Does the eye cell have the gene? Yes. Does it read the gene for rhodopsin? Yes, okay? It needs that gene in order to create this protein that's gonna help you see light. So therefore, it's going to read it. It has it, and it's gonna read it. Let's consider Preston. Preston is one of my favorite proteins. I studied him for my capstone in university, and super interesting when it comes to bats and dolphins and all sorts of creatures. Okay, so Preston is a protein inside of your ear, and it helps your little hairs in your ear vibrate. That tells your brain that you're hearing sound. So right now, your Preston protein, this protein right here, is working inside of your ears so that you can hear my voice. Okay, without it, you'd basically be deaf. And the gene codes, the gene is found on chromosome 7. So does your neuron need to hear? No, it doesn't need to hear. So it still has the Preston gene though, okay? It does not read the gene for Preston, okay? Does the ear cell have the gene for Preston? Well, yes, okay? Does the ear cell read the gene for Preston? Yeah, it does, okay? Yes. So it's going to read that gene because it needs to access the instructions for building these proteins that are going to help it hear, okay? And you can probably guess we're going to fill this out with yes and no. The rod cell in the eye does not read Preston. So analogy to help you kind of think of this, if we could just imagine a neighborhood, and let's say that this neighborhood is made up of multiple households. And let's say that this family here, let's say that you go into the neighborhood and you go door to door and you give everyone the same cookbook. Okay, it's a recipe book. Let's call it Betty's cookbook. Okay, so everybody gets Betty's cookbook. Everyone has the same cookbook. Does that mean that everybody's going to make the same meals all week? No, okay? Let's say that this family really loves Italian food, okay? I love Italian food. So I love making anything with pasta and mushroom sauce, and it's so good, okay? So let's say they love to read the Italian recipes, but let's say that they don't like to read, anything, maybe Chinese recipes, okay? They don't like Chinese food. Let's say that these people over here, they love to make salads, and so they read all of the salad recipes in here, but they hate soup, so they don't like to read soup, okay? Let's say here that they love Mexican food, so they are going to be making a ton of Mexican food. And let's say that they hate lasagna, so they're not going to read the lasagna. Okay, maybe let's actually change this. Let's say that they hate Italian food, okay? Ooh, all right. So each house has the same cookbook, but they read different recipes depending on what their household likes to eat, okay? Same with these cells. These cells are like houses. Each cell has the same genome or the same recipe book, but depending on what it does, it's going to read different recipes or different genes inside of that book. Let's consider one last one. This is nerve growth factor protein, or NGF. Okay, it helps nerves grow. So we study this protein a lot to help us understand Alzheimer's. So let's look at the neuron here. Does this neuron have the gene? Yes, everybody has that gene, okay? All cells have that gene. We can just write yes for all of that. Does it read the gene? Yeah, it needs to read the gene for nerve growth factor because it needs that protein. Does the hair cell read it? No. Okay? It doesn't like Italian food. It doesn't like nerve growth factor. Okay? No. All right? So each cell has the same genome, but it's only going to read the genes for these different proteins, those instructions, okay? Kind of imagine the recipes in the book are like hundreds of letters long. That's the same with the genes. They're hundreds of bases long, and they kind of give instructions like, hey, add this amino acid to here, to here, to here, and fold up in this way, okay? So that is the genome. How do we package up this genome, okay? If we look at a recipe book, it's packaged inside of a book, and it has a nice spine, maybe with a title on it, and there's pages on the inside. Well, we also need to store DNA in a certain way as well, and that is stored up in chromosomes. Okay, a chromosome is a tightly wound up DNA molecule containing hundreds of genes. It kind of looks like this. All right, so this is a piece of yarn, and if I were to zoom in, let's say that I were to take some of this yarn out, okay, and if I wanted to zoom in on that, I could get those pieces. Oh, look, it's already in a kind of double helix. Ooh, there we go. All right. So if I zoomed in on this string, I already have a double helix. If I unwind it, that's what it looks like. But I have a double helix of DNA, and it's wound up inside of this yarn. All right. Same goes for chromosomes. This right here is a chromosome. And if I zoom in, let's zoom in. Into the chromosome, I see my double helix, and that's kind of wrapped up around all these little proteins inside of this chromosome, okay? So this right here is human chromosome. The reason we call it a chromosome is because chromo means color, okay? You might have, if somebody talks about chrome, they're talking about color. And that's because some of the tools that we use to study chromosomes, they look really colorful. Okay, so they're colorful little bodies is what it means in Latin, okay? So chromosome. So how many do we have? Okay, we have 46 chromosomes, and they come in pairs. If I have 46 socks, how many pairs of socks do I have? I have 23 pairs. Okay, I have 23 pairs of 46 chromosomes. The DNA is wrapped around proteins called histones. That's these guys right here. Okay, so those are histone proteins. It's kind of weird because DNA codes for proteins, and then proteins help store DNA. So it's almost like which came first, the chicken or the egg? I think that's a really cool sign of intelligent design because you have to have both things present at the same time. Okay, a protein that you're coding for, and the proteins help store it. It'd be like if a library had all of these books for instructions on how to build shelves, and all the books were on shelves themselves. Shelves themselves, that right? Okay, we're moving on. All right, so like many other eukaryotes, remember what are eukaryotes? Eukaryotes would be anything, whether it's any animal that has a nucleus in its cell, or a plant. Plants also have nuclei in their cells, and mushrooms as well have those, okay? So anything that has nuclei as a eukaryote. So most eukaryotes are what we call diploid. What? Okay, you've learned this word from your root words. Di means two. Diploid means we have two sets of chromosomes. Two sets of chromosomes. One set of 23 came from the father, and one set of 23 came from the mother. Okay, so we're going to take a break from this paper, and I want you to turn to your card right here that is figure 6.1. We're going to look at a human karyotype to see what I mean by being diploid. This right here is a map of my chromosomes. I call it a karyotype. Remember, kary, we learned this word in our root words. Karyo, like a eukaryote, means nucleus. So a karyotype shows what is inside of the nucleus of a normal body cell. Okay, so like the cells inside of my hand right now. Okay, again, there are 46 chromosomes and 23 pairs of chromosomes. So let's look at this. Right here, this is what I would call a pair of chromosomes, and this is pair number 1. So one way that I could say this is I could describe this as chromosome pair 1. That's what I'll just call this. Kind of like sock pair 1. It's a pair of socks, okay? This is chromosome pair 2. Okay? This, so on one side, you have a maternal chromosome and a paternal chromosome. So maternal, let's look, remember, what does ma mean, okay? Basically means ma or mother. Pa means your pa or father, okay? So one came from the mother and one came from the father, and we both refer to them as chromosome 3. So notice we number the chromosomes, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We label them 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3 because they are the same. They're in pairs, okay? We label them by the pairs. We are going to color code these. You should have a red or a blue color pencil, or maybe you have a pen, like one of those cool pens where you could click red and blue. We are going to color code the sets, okay? So the paternal set, we're going to color code blue. Okay, the paternal set came from pa, okay? And the maternal set came from ma. Okay, paternal and maternal I'm going to use as red. We're going to use these colors for the rest of the unit. So try to have something red or blue to do these with, okay? So let's color code our sets here. So the maternal, we're just going to color code red. So what I want you to do is I want you to box the left chromosome on each of these red. Okay, so here's from the mother. Okay, we got the red, the maternal chromosomes. Red. All right, now down here, we got to be careful. This is red. X is red, okay? And we'll do this here. Okay, so now we've got all of these color-coded red. If you can kind of just imagine in your eyes right now, if you cross out if we cover up these chromosomes right here, okay, what you're looking at, the red, that is one set. So that's the red set, okay? Diploid means that we have two sets, and so there's another set, and that's the blue set. So we're going to use blue. Sorry, let me use this blue instead, all right? We're going to use blue to represent paternal. Okay, so now here's my blue set, which came from the sperm of the father of this human being. So this is a human being's chromosome karyotype. Let's color this in blue. So here's my blue set, the second set. All right, here, Y came from the father, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so There we go. Now we have the red set and the blue set. Each pair of chromosomes contains 2 individual chromosomes. So I would refer to this as an individual chromosome, and this is a pair of chromosomes. Okay, let's just kind of look at some examples to show you the number of genes in each. So if you kind of think of this chromosome as a book, think of it as a book on the shelf of a library. This one contains 1,000 recipes. Oh, that's a lot of recipes. That's a good number, okay? So chromosome 6 contains 1,000 recipes. Chromosome 7 contains 900 recipes, okay? Chromosome 8 contains 700 recipes. Notice, what are we doing? We're decreasing in size. When you look at a cell under the microscope, the chromosomes are going to be scattered kind of like this, okay? They're not lined up like this so neatly, okay? So what we do to create a karyotype is we take the larger ones first and we kind of separate them out and we kind of put them in order from largest to smallest. So that's what we're doing here with this karyotype. So the paternal one contains 700 genes, and this one contains 700 genes as well. And here's where it's crazy. They both contain the same genes, okay? Let's say that this were a cookbook and it contained recipes for chocolate chip muffins and raisin oatmeal cookies and Black Forest cake, okay? This one might contain chocolate chip raisin muffins, and this one might contain raisin coconut cookies, and this one might contain what was the other one? A Black Forest cake. This one might contain carrot cake or something like that, okay? So they both have the same kind of recipes for muffins, cookies, and cake, but they're slightly different versions, okay? That was the analogy. In real life, okay, you have the same genes, there's slightly different versions. So let me show you what I mean, okay? If we look right here, this little section of this chromosome, that's the gene for making hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein inside of your blood. We've talked about this one before. Okay, it's the one that catches the oxygen when you breathe in. Okay, you breathe in the oxygen. The oxygen needs to go to your mitochondria so that you can help receive the hydrogens that have been operating ATP synthase so that you can charge your batteries from ADP into ATP. And hemoglobin is the one that carries that oxygen because remember, proteins do transport, okay? So you need the instructions for building that little guy, and that is right there on the tip top of chromosome 11. Now, these are both the genes for chromosome 11. One from your mother and one from your father. You need 2 copies. If we look down here at chromosome 15, okay, right here, this contains a gene that influences eye color, okay? So for instance, let's say that the father has a gene that would influence your eye color to be brown, and your mother has a gene or a version of the gene that gives you a blue eyes, okay? So they're both the same protein that codes for eye color, but one is kind of a different version than another one. We'll talk later about how your cells decide which one to read. So if one parent has brown eyes and the other parent has blue eyes, they're both passing on those genes to you, and you're going to choose to read one of them, okay? Here's another one that's really common for people to talk about, and it's a little bit gross, but on chromosome 16, right here, this is the gene that codes for proteins that affect how you kind of transport wax in your cells, which means that one version might have a dry earwax version, another one might have a wet earwax version, okay? So some people, their earwax is kind of dry and flaky. Other people, their earwax inside of their ear is really wet and sticky. That's because you have different recipes coding for different proteins. It's a little gross, but I will be talking about earwax a lot when it comes to genes because it's kind of one of those like really well-known genes that there's clear differences in the versions between them, okay? Now, here's what gets really interesting. Down here in this part of the karyotype, we're going to explore the things that kind of influence death and sex, okay? So biological sex. So on the tips of your chromosomes right here, There are these things called telomeres. You need to know that, okay? Telomeres are on the ends of these chromosomes. They're kind of like caps, okay? They actually protect your genes, and they protect your the way that your DNA is being read. I'm going to pull something out here, okay? They are kind of like, if you've ever looked at your shoelace, here's a shoelace, all right? And on the ends of your shoelace, I have what are called aglets. I don't know if you knew that that is what they are called. They are called aglets, and you might know that depending on what kind of TV shows you watch. Okay, so this is aglet. Telomeres are basically aglets. On the ends of your chromosomes, they protect. Now, every time that your cells divide, which happens as you grow, they get a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter, and eventually they start getting so short that you're really not protecting your genes very well. That contributes to dying from old age. So one of the reasons why people die of old age has to do with the fact that their chromosomes inside of their cells are not being protected as much. Now, if we made really long telomeres, theoretically, scientists have calculated a human being's body could last for about 1,000 years at maximum if you had really long telomeres, which is really interesting. So now, we're getting to really tiny chromosomes. They contain fewer and fewer genes. And now we're coming over here to these very special genes because they are different depending on the biological sex of the person, okay? So these are X and Y chromosomes. We call them sex chromosomes, okay? X and Y chromosomes are that if a person has X and Y chromosomes in their cells, okay, they're going to develop as a male, okay? With the Y chromosome kind of determines if it's going to be a male. Okay, the XX chromosomes, if you have an X and an X, then that person is going to develop into a female, okay? So we have an X and a Y, so that means that this is the karyotype of a male. So this is a male human being. Now, just keep in mind, I have a little asterisk here. In a couple lessons later, we are going to talk about there are some different conditions which might make this a little more complex than just X and Y. We will talk about those later. But just for now, know that in general, in most cases, XY is going to indicate that it's a male, and XX is going to indicate that it is a female, okay? So any karyotype that I give you, you should be able to tell if it's a male or female based off of the X or Y chromosomes. That's what you're looking for. All right, good. That's one side. Let's go ahead and flip over to this side. Okay, this is another view of another person's karyotype. And in this view, we can see that the chromosomes are shaped a little bit differently. Okay, right here, they look kind of just like long single lines. Right here, they're spread out a bit more. The reason I included this picture is because it shows us a little bit more clearly what chromosomes look like. This actually looks the same as this. And I know it might be hard to tell. These do have those little arms, but this photo is kind of blurry. It was taken from really far back, and you can't see them very well. In chromosome 20, you can kind of see that they have little arms right here. You can kind of see that. But basically, what I want you to imagine is a chromosome kind of looking like this, okay? Now, let's say that these are the this is a chromosome, and I've got hundreds of hundreds of genes on this chromosome recipes. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but if a cell is preparing to divide into two cells, so if I have one cell, okay, and it's going to divide up, both of those cells need the same DNA. So that means every time you divide and every time I grow, then those cells are going to need to make a copy. Kind of like if I were to split the library up into two libraries, I need to make a copy of every book so that each library can be the same. So what that means is that my chromosomes are duplicated. So it's kind of like the cell takes your genes and it runs a little copy machine okay, and it makes a copy of that. And what it does is those copies are actually attached kind of like this, okay? They're attached here at the center. So these are two copies. They're basically the same. They're almost like identical twins, okay? And we kind of just wrap them up and connect them like this. Now, in this photo that you see here for this karyotype, those arms are kind of spread out really nicely. So we can see both of them spread out. In this photo, just the way that they took it, they're still duplicated. They're just really close together, so you can hardly tell. And it just depends on how they're taking those scans within the cell, whether you see them well or not, okay? Now, this kind of gets a little tricky because these chromosomes have duplicated and they've made a copy of themselves, but we still consider it to be one chromosome. And we consider them two chromosomes when they separate, and they won't separate until we divide the cell, but don't worry about that now. Right now, as long as they're connected, we've still got one chromosome, okay? So let's just write one right here. I'll be using several different words to describe this shape or these duplicated chromosomes. There's several different words that you can use, okay? You could say that you are copying the chromosomes, you are replicating the chromosomes, or you are duplicating the chromosomes. So duplicated, replicated, copied, either one that you want to use, that's fine. Okay. So what I have here is I have again, I'm going to picture my paternal chromosomes, and then my maternal ones right here is the cell's going to make a copy of it and then switch that copy over so that they're connected, and now I've got that chromosome there, okay? Now, the reason why we take pictures of the chromosomes when they're duplicating is because when they do that, they are really visible because they're really they're thick and they have to all be in one place to copy, and so that's why we take the pictures like that. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and I want you to color these sets again. So again, we have the maternal right here, and we have the paternal chromosomes right here. So go ahead and you can pause the video and color in the rest of these chromosomes. So, all right, this is one copy of the maternal chromosome. This is another copy of the maternal chromosome. This is one copy of the paternal chromosome, and that's another copy of the paternal chromosome, and they're attached here, okay? And we kind of call these arms. These are arms on the chromosome. Now, and I kind of put what I just explained verbally right here, so you can use this for your reference. All of these little statements that I make here kind of apply to all of the chromosomes. I'm just kind of showing you as I go along. Now, notice these chromosomes, we still have 46 chromosomes and we still have 23 pairs. So if I ask you, what is this a picture of? This is not 4 chromosomes. How many chromosomes is this? 1, 2. 1, 2, not 4, okay? And let's look down here. What is this the karyotype of? Notice how we have an X right here and an X right here. So this is a female. Now, X chromosomes are not called X chromosomes because they look like X's. I don't actually know why we call them X chromosomes, but we just decided to call them that, okay? Y chromosomes don't really look like Y, like the letter Y, okay? So a lot of students will draw, oh, there's my X chromosome and there's my Y. Okay, no, that's not what it looks like, okay? Notice the difference, okay? XX chromosomes are identical in size. Here, XY, what's smaller? Y. So the male chromosome, the chromosome that makes an individual a male, is shorter. It's smaller. Okay? Whereas the female has 2 of those X chromosomes, okay? So that's kind of how biological sex. Now you know, okay, why, and this applies to mammals too. So if you look at any mammal like a horse, okay, why is that horse a male and that horse is a female? Well, it has to do with how their DNA is wrapped up and what chromosomes, what bundles of DNA they have inside of their cells. That's why they have that male or female, okay? So that applies to any mammal. So I could show you a karyotype from any mammal and ask you what is the sex of that mammal, and you can look at the X and the Y and tell me what that is. Okay, good. So we are done with this figure 6.1. Let's return back to our notes. Keep this somewhere that is safe where you can reference it a lot more, okay? So how did we get to this first place, okay? Because this would be like in just one of your cells in your hand where you have male and female, or sorry, the maternal and the paternal cells. How did we even get to that in the first place? Well, you developed from a single cell that came from the uniting of a sperm and an egg, okay? So let's look at this, okay? We're gonna look at just biologically, how do you create a new organism and how do you transport those chromosomes to the new organism, okay? Sperm carries a set of chromosomes from the male. In animals, such as a human, sperm cells typically look like this. So this is a male cell, okay? Fertilization happens after sexual intercourse, okay? Fertilization is when the sperm cells are going to be swimming to the egg inside of the female, okay? So the female has an egg cell. So here's a human egg cell inside of a female, and it's gonna hold a set of chromosomes inside of the female. So it has 23 of those chromosomes inside of it, okay? Inside of the egg cell, and I didn't number that exactly as 23, that's fine, okay? Inside of the sperm, it also has 23, okay? So 23 chromosomes, and they add, so the sperm combines with the egg, and that fertilization now creates a new organism. It's gonna start off as a cell, and then those cells are going to start dividing, and they grow, and they're gonna continue to grow until they develop into a baby. All right, new offspring. So offspring is just anything that's being formed from this process, okay? So now this offspring has paternal chromosomes from the father and maternal chromosomes from the mother. Actually, I'm gonna write sperm and egg here, okay? Paternal chromosomes from the sperm and egg. So that fertilized egg is the first cell that you existed as. You used to be a unicellular organism, okay? So here's my question. How do plants do sex? Do plants have sperm? Yes, plants do have sperm. It's carried inside of pollen. So if you're allergic to pollen, okay, you are allergic to plant sperm, basically, okay? So the sperm is inside of these pollen cells. So these are cells that they contain the sperm cells, okay? So pollination bees, okay, when the bees or any other kind of insect is pollinating flowers, taking that, it's basically taking plant sperm and it is delivering it to other flowers. Okay, it might be within the same flower or it might be from a different flower, which is usually better for genetic reasons. But yeah, bees are helping with plant sex. Fertilization combines the sperm and the egg. Okay, the egg is kind of at the bottom of the flower here. So the egg's down here within the flower. And the sperm is, sorry, we're gonna label this here. The sperm is produced right here. So that's kind of where the sperm is. It's that yellow, powdery kind of stuff that you see on the flower. And the egg is produced right here. Okay, so that's where the egg is. That's where the sperm is. And when you can deliver those, then fertilization happens. That's going to create a new organism, which is a seed, okay? The seed is the new organism. This seed is diploid. It has 2 sets of chromosomes. 1 set of chromosomes from the egg and 1 set of chromosomes from the pollen, okay? So remember, chromosomes are inside of plants, not just animals. They're also in fungi. They're in all sorts of different organisms. They're not just in animals. Okay, so this baby's also diploid, has that mother and father set. Now, from this point on, we're going to talk a lot about male and female, paternal and maternal things. So we need to know what the symbols are. So when we want to symbolize male, I'm going to use this symbol. Okay, when I use this, when I talk about females, I'm going to use this symbol. Notice the plus sign goes down and the arrow goes kind of at 1 o'clock right here, okay? It's not going, the arrow's not going down and the plus sign's not going up, so don't confuse which direction they go in. Now, you might be wondering, why do we even have these symbols? And it kind of goes back to sexist Greek culture. These are Greek symbols. And basically what this represents is a shield and a spear. So you kind of imagine this dude who's going out for war, and he's carrying a shield and a spear, and he's the fighter, okay? And this right here represents a mirror, okay? So you can kind of imagine, like, this is the mirror and this is the handle, and there's a woman sitting in her house, and she's staring at herself because she wants to look beautiful, and she's looking at the mirror. So that's, it's a mirror, it's a female, and here this is a shield and a spear. That's the ancient reason why we have these symbols, whether you like it or not. All right, so just quick review. How many chromosomes does the father give the child through the sperm? 23. How many chromosomes does the mother give? 23. We'll talk about that whole process for well, wait a minute. How does the mother even create a cell that only has 23 chromosomes? We'll talk about that later, okay? But right now, you just need to know you get 23 and 23, and when you add those up, you get 46 chromosomes. And then when that baby grows older and it becomes a human being, and let's say that it wants to pass on its cells to create offspring, it's going to create 23 chromosome cells, okay? Now, last point of these notes, and this is pretty important because I will ask you questions on this, okay? Parents only pass on DNA if that DNA is in the sperm or egg cell. Now you might think like, okay, yeah, I got that. But let's think about this, okay? Let's say that a mutation happens in the DNA. So that's just an error. If an error happens inside of the DNA inside of a sperm cell, it's going to be passed on to the child. So let's say that, something's wrong in here and there's a little error inside of the sperm cell. That's going to be passed on, and each of the cells inside of that human are going to have that error, okay? Now, if a mutation happens in like a skin cell in the ear, it's not going to be passed on to the child. Okay, so let's say that you have, okay, here's a man, Mr. Man here, okay? So here's this man, and let's say that he accidentally falls into a dumpster, okay? And that dumpster is full of radioactive waste, okay? So he falls in there, and it's not good. All right. Now, radioactivity can cause mutations. So let's say that for some reason, the only mutations that happened inside of his, let's go with inside of his face, okay? So let's say his face cells, the skin on his face or in his head had those mutations, okay? If he has a child in the next, year or whatever, that child very well might not have any of those mutations, because if he didn't have any mutations inside of the sperm, then that's not going to be passed on to the child, okay? Another thing would be like sunburns, okay? So sunburns would be caused by ultraviolet light from the sun. A sunburn is actually, it's not like, oh, my skin got really hot and so it's literally burning. No, a sunburn is actually mutations. And so it turns red, you've actually had mutated cells, and it's not good, okay? So sunburns causes mutation. So if, this guy gets a sunburn on his back or something like that, he's not going to pass any of those mutations onto his kids. He's just not, okay? If he gets like a mutation in his sperm cells, then which he's not going to get from a sunburn, okay? Then he would pass it on to the child. But just from a sunburn, no mutations that you acquire inside of a normal body cell will be passed on to the offspring unless it happens inside of a sperm or an egg cell. Okay? Good. Whew. All right, so we've learned all about chromosomes. That's note 6.1. Big takeaways. Every cell inside of your body has all of the same genes, but only certain cells read different genes depending on what they actually do. And they're wrapped up, all those genes are wrapped up inside of these chromosomes. Your genome is a library of those chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes, 23 from the mother and 23 from the father. And a male is represented by shields and spears, and mirrors represent females, apparently. All right, there you go. That is note 6.1. You are done. You can move on to your homework, 6.1.